Recall expands to include 7 million pounds of deli
Nearly
meat.
150 sick in salmonella outbreak affecting 11
E. coli
countries.
outbreak in the U.S. kills 10 and sickens hundreds.
All these headlines about food safety. This isn't just policy, it's personal. Behind every recall, every outbreak, and every regulation, there's someone whose life was permanently changed or lost. I know that because I am one of them.
Welcome to Confessions of a Food Safety A-Hole. I'm Gennette Zimmer.
And I'm Dr. Darin Detweiler, former submarine guy, longtime food safety advocate, author, and someone who's been speaking up for over 3.5 decades, even when it wasn't easy or popular.
This isn't your average food safety podcast. We're not talking about bacteria and best practices. We won't be teaching you the proper temperature to cook a chicken breast.
165.
Or even how to pronounce Listeria monocytogenes.
Not even close.
We're diving into the culture, the conflicts, and the human cost of getting it wrong.
We'll share stories, some painful, some funny, all true. Revealing the real experiences of someone who's spent a lifetime behind the scenes.
These aren't stories you read about in newspapers or magazines, and they're not found on conference agendas. What they are everyday experiences of people who have dedicated their lives to making sure you have access to safe food.
Because when it comes to protecting every plate, it's not just policy and data. It's personal. And it's time we start talking about it like it is. Okay, we are live.
All right. Welcome to Confessions of a Food Safety A-Hole on the road edition.
Yes, we are on the road. Technically, we're on the 101.
Yep. On our way to Salinas.
Yes, the greater Salinas Valley area, the produce sector of California, the produce belt, I guess is a better word for it. And, we were here last year meeting
Yes.
with the LGMA and doing some touring, and we talked about
That's
it
right,
in
we
an early
did.
episode.
And it was a really great experience. So we're happy to be going back up to Salinas. I am particularly happy because last time we were here, we stopped at a farm stand that had the most incredible artichokes, and we have decided we need to buy more produce from this place.
A little bit more than a stand. I mean, this is like a full-blown family store. They had some actual, ready to eat, commercially packaged goods, but of local ingredients, as well as the completely like fresh off the vine type items. And man, were we blown away by the taste when you completely cut out the middleman.
Yeah,
Impressive.
it was really impressive.
So we're like 100 miles south of Salinas,
Yep.
and we decided to do an episode on the road.
Yeah, so this is a little experiment to see how this turns out. We're both going to be traveling together quite a bit for the rest of the year, and we thought that doing a couple of the episodes on the road, kind of like I'm Bing Crosby and you're Bob Hope.
Just like that.
Just like that.
Of course, if you're a very young listener and you have no idea who they are, go watch some YouTube videos. They're out there. Because I grew up on the road shows and all the hijinks and madcap mayhem on on their journey from point A to point B.
Yep.
Now, what songs will you be singing? No, just kidding. We won't be doing any song and dance routines, unlike Bing Crosby and Bob Hope. But we will be talking about some really cool topics. In fact, I hear that this episode is actually going to be in 3 acts.
That is true. This is a huge experiment. I'm not even sure if I'll be able to edit down some of this road noise to make it tolerable for the listener. We shall see.
So is this like the interpretive dance version of a podcast?
Yes. Experimental phase.
Excellent.
Yeah. So, Darin, tell people what is bringing us to Salinas.
So we are going to attend the Western Food Safety Conference at Hartnell College in Salinas, and it's mostly a produce sector conference. I am the keynote speaker on day 2, and I'm really excited. We're going to be talking about everything from FDA regulations to sanitation, foodborne pathogens, recalls, recall simulations, and mock recalls. I'm going to be speaking about the idea that food safety has no expiration date. What does it mean to be more than just a leader in food safety?
Yeah.
And I'm also excited to meet up with some folks from the Leafy Green Marketing Agreement, LGMA, folks within the recall community, folks from the FDA, and also some new folks, because this is the first time I've been to this conference.
Yeah. No, it'll be really cool. But that brings up a question that I have for you. What does it mean to be more than a leader in food safety?
Well, I'm always aware of the fact that companies hire people and there's a job description and there's, the requirements and the job expectations, these bullet points that are enumerating all these different things. But, when there's a major incident, when there's a major problem, and you hear the top executives saying that it was the courage of their employees, it was the professionalism, it was the body of knowledge, all these kind of things, it's amazing how what was needed of the food safety expertise is far more than what is bulleted on a job description.
Right.
And this idea that food safety has no expiration, we look at the idea of, food having expiration dates, and even in the world of academia, you could say, well, information beyond, like case studies and research beyond so many years old is antiquated. You don't want to use anything that's more than, let's say, 10, maybe 15 years old, depending on the field.
Yeah.
When it comes to food safety, I think a food safety leader needs to be someone who is communicating and a catalyst for food safety, someone who is adding to not only the communication, but even the continuity and that kind of forward thinking of food safety. The bigger picture here is that, data and compliance and those job description bullet points, that's kind of like the beginning point.
Mm-hmm.
And what a true food safety leader, someone who sees their legacy, right, this journey that they want to navigate, goes beyond that starting point and really looks at how their role in the stories that they tell, the why, the history, the persuasive, the even celebrating, is so important. Again, elements that are not necessarily captured on the job description.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Now, I've never actually been to this Western Food Safety Conference.
Neither have I.
I was just going to ask. I didn't think you'd been there either.
No.
So what do you think makes this one different from some of the other ones that we have attended?
That's a really good question. You would think that, wouldn't you just need to have one food safety conference, right?
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
there are so many different food safety conferences, many of which we've actually attended.
Oh yeah, we were just talking about the convenience stores,
Yep.
the retail. There's user conferences. There's international conferences.
Tech conferences.
So they all have kind of like their own sector angle, if you will, like
Right.
their own agenda. Western food safety is very much two things. It's very California and it's very produce. And you're just not going to have the kind of one size fits all that, if you go to a conference in New Jersey, it can be a great conference, but they're not going to focus on some of the same exact, very pertinent, relevant topics that the growers here in the Salinas area would find most useful for what they're doing.
Right.
Whether it is sanitation, irrigation, holding, but again, kind of like the many different flavors of food safety and what is
Pun intended?
Yes, pun intended. What is the kind of more bespoke agenda for the specific audience?
Okay.
We've been to many in California. I just was in one in Long Beach a few weeks ago, the
Right.
California Environmental Health Association.
Right.
Did they talk about produce? Yeah, I'm sure they did. If I recall, the different speakers, I'm sure someone talked about produce. But this one is really aligned specifically for the produce industry.
Okay. You just said something that totally reminds me of, this is the Western Food Safety. I remember it was just a couple of years back, you went to Texas because you met with legislators from
Yeah.
all over the United States. And what was the thing? I remember it was so interesting what the thing that surprised them the most, which didn't seem like it should be a surprise, but apparently was a huge surprise.
So yeah, this was like a gathering of state legislators before they would go into their next legislative session. And this was kind of like a policy 101 in certain areas. And I was brought in by the National Environmental Health Association to give the audience of legislators from various states
Yep.
kind of an overview of just how different food policies were from state to state. And all I really did was I took kind of like a coloring page map of the United States, and I made several slides. One was based on gloves. This state requires gloves. This state does not require gloves. This state doesn't say anything about gloves. And I color coded them so they could see how, just looking at gloves, how different a map of the United States looked.
Right.
We looked at, one was like some states require everyone to have a food handling certificate. Some states require at least one person on all shifts must have that training. Some states require one person at the company, doesn't even have to be there.
Right.
And some states have no real policy in place for it. Animals, like dogs, like service animals. Some states have this policy, some states have that policy. And I went on for a couple more different things, but the whole idea was I was showing them that food safety is, when you look at pathogens, the science of it is the same across all political and geographic boundaries.
Right.
But when you look at the politicization and the regulation of it, it's almost as if food safety depends on your zip code, all these different elements, and how the federal requirements only kind of apply to if it's interstate commerce, like food being shipped from, let's say, California to Arizona or
Okay.
to Idaho or Texas or whatever, or B, if the state level regulations and policies are aligned with the FDA model food code.
Okay.
And so that was really an eye-opener. I had so many questions in terms of how, are there other things that we need to know are different from state to state? And I thought this was pretty important for state legislators to realize that you may think your state has this, but here's where you are in comparison, because everyone wanted to see their state. Where's my
Right.
state on that map, and how does it compare to other states?
Yep. Yep.
And it seemed like this was almost like the first time that they were really looking at comparing notes with their people, not just on the other side of the aisle, but on the other side of the state line.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, literally just like right next door. I mean, Texas is a huge state, so right next door is half a day's drive away. But even their next door neighbors don't have the same policies as they do.
Well, and I had to answer kind of an obvious question there, which, when someone saw that their state was this color versus that color, or, this years old versus that many years old of a policy, there was that inevitable question from one of those state legislators, is my state bad in this?
Right.
And I had to say, I'm not saying your state's bad, but I'm saying you need to ask yourself, why is the policy you're dealing with predating the technology that we're taking for granted?
Right.
Why is your state this, but you're surrounded by states that have something that would be seen, that would be viewed as being a higher level of a higher standard, if you will.
Higher standard, higher level of safety.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that anyone on a road trip, and this was the kind of analogy I was using, if I'm on a road trip from point A to point B. And if I remember, I said, look, I did recently drive from Boston to Los Angeles.
Well, it wasn't that recent anymore.
Well, at the time, it was
Yeah,
recent.
That's
but,
true.
But you're right, it's not that recent anymore. My God, it's been 6 years.
We've been in California for almost 6 years now.
Wow. But at the time, I think it was only 2 or 3 years before that. I pointed out that, if you're on a road trip from the East Coast to the West Coast, you go through all these different situations and these different levels of policies and these different, regulations that exist. If we were, let's say if I was an athlete on a football team or baseball team, if I went from stadium to stadium to stadium, I would never accept a scenario where the rules of the game differed that widely from ballpark to ballpark or arena to arena.
Right.
And yet, how is it acceptable in terms of food safety?
Yeah. Well, that is an interesting analogy, because if you had that many different rules, then, looking at a football team that's based out of one state traveling to compete against a football team that has completely different rules in their state, then they have to learn the rules when they're playing in that state, but the other team vice versa has to learn the rules. Same thing with food companies that are producing food that goes interstate.
Well, there's also, look at for instance, Target stores. They have many of them have grocery stores, right? And you look at your McDonald's, or pick a restaurant that you can find franchises or whatever locations across the country. Imagine how difficult it is for them to be one company, one food safety mission, but every different location where their employees are, it's but you have to play by this game. You have to play by that set of rules. We can't even have one standardized training. Or what you have to do is you have to say, this is the standard, and even though this is allowed in this state, we're going to hold you to this higher standard.
That's what I was going to say. It seems to me that the easiest, most convenient way to deal with that would be to set the highest standard, to pick whatever state has the highest standard and enforce it to all their stores across the entire country. But is that what actually happens?
Well, we know that there's historical examples of companies that, but we're able to get away with this lower temperature in this state, so we're going to go with what it says in that state.
Yeah. That's disappointing.
Well, and I think we've seen some change in that, because over the last 3 decades, we have had more centralization of policies, and we do have states talking to each other more and more on the public health side of things. And so it's not as bleak as it might sound, but the fact that we still have differences, I'm confident when I say that still here we are in 2026, and your food safety levels, your ability to either avoid or have a faster closure to a foodborne illness really depends on your zip code.
Right. All right, just a slight shift of topic, something that literally just kind of hit me. You mentioned that you hadn't seen, didn't know whether or not Raw Farms would actually be at this particular conference, but that they possibly would be, because they are...
they're not too far away.
They're not too far away, so it's very possible that they are going to be at this conference. And you've been very critical of them, and you did, say I have been very critical of them, so it would be interesting if I happen to run into them. Would you say something? Would you avoid it? Would you be the food safety a-hole and call them out? How do you think you'll handle that if they are actually in attendance and you do end up interacting with somebody?
That is a great question, and thank you for that curveball. So, on one hand, being a professional and working on the assumption that there are people who, if someone from this company is attending this thing, that they're there, for all the best of intentions. And I understand that food safety is a moving target, if you will. what was a concern one day is no longer a concern, or what was not a concern one day is a concern, and that people in a position, they are replaced or they're added to in what they do. I don't want to do something that would become part of the problem. I want to support that. Let's assume that they're doing the best they can now. Now, I am not an expert in this company. I'm not an expert in their product and their processes, things like that. But my comments were focused on leadership. And as someone who has spent 3 decades talking with leaders who are proactive and who lead with intent, leaders who have learned their lesson, they've been reactive, and they've had to deal with problems, working in the capacity of a professor who teaches courses on leadership, and being someone who's been in a leadership role, my comments were really focused on the leadership, because it has nothing to do with, when I say it, the issue with Raw Farm, and not only their contaminated product and their delay in the recall, and then they're calling the recall as a quote-unquote recall under protest.
Yep.
That had nothing to do with data. It had nothing to do with science or technology. It had to do with the leadership decisions, and that's what I was calling out. And part of my conversation, which is about leadership at this event, I have to realize that this is a situation that is on people's minds in terms of the leadership and what becomes normalized around the decisions pertaining to not only preventing contaminated foods, but also when it comes to recalls and how we handle those situations. And this idea of delaying, going against FDA, and then 2.5 weeks later, now agreeing to do a recall, but quote unquote under protest. We don't talk about these things too often. And we cannot allow this to be normalized, because it may be something that could be viewed as being in the best interest of the company. And I would say that in the short term, because I don't think it's the best leadership decision for the company in the long term. And I definitely do not believe that something like that is in the best interest of their consumers,
right,
and the relationship and the trust and the respect and the reputation that exists between a company and the consumer. So I'm not going to base my presentation on that, and I am not necessarily going to seek out, hey, are you from this company? Are you from this company? Kind of a deal. But I'm not going to let it go if I'm questioned about it, and if I'm approached, I will address it. But I will tell you this. I brought it up 2 weeks ago in Long Beach before the California Environmental Health Association, and you could tell by the shaking of the heads and the questions people were asking, this topic was on their mind.
Interesting. Well, thank you. I think this is the perfect time.
And what time would that be?
It would be time for the Ren Fair report.
The Ren Fair report?
Yes, the Ren Fair report. So here we are at the Renaissance Fair.
Yes, we're in Irwindale, California.
Yes, we are at the Santa Ana Dam.
Yes, which I remember going to when I was in junior high, and it was just like plain brand new.
Yep.
Now not so new. In fact, it looks like it's something out of the Renaissance era.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of things here already. We've seen
So,
friars and popes,
yes.
pirates.
We saw a glass blowing exhibition, which was
Yes.
outstanding.
And it was interrupted by
A carrion, yes. There was our first food experience.
yes.
Basically, on one of the posts that holds up the tents, a carrion type bird brought his meal and ate a meal, like literally.
Didn't just eat it. We learned how tearing it apart.
Oh yeah, we
live
saw
in front of a studio
ripping-
audience.
ripping the skin and digging right deep in there.
And it was hard.
Circle of life.
It was, circle of life. It was hard for the audience not to notice that even the glass blower was like, what is everyone paying attention to?
Yes. It was a first for him to have that upstage him.
Well, we are surrounded by a ton of people because it is literally lunchtime, the noon hour. We're in a food court, and it's about as authentic as you get.
Yeah.
We've got turkey legs galore,
Yes.
but then we also have pizza. And Chinese food.
Yeah, which is kind of weird. But
And
fish and chips.
sourdough bowls.
Bread bowls.
Sourdough bowls with chowder.
I tried to get a tri-tip sandwich, and you tried to get pulled pork.
Yes,
And the line
lines
was
are long.
just too crazy for that, so we opted for
Loaded baked potato.
yes, which turned out to be really good.
It is.
How did the booth look to you as a food safety expert?
Well, I like the fact that they had their separation between the people who were taking money and handling credit cards and handling cash, and they would enter the order into the computer, and then someone with gloves would bring it out. Again, it was nothing but, it was a very singular thing. It was just the baked potato and what toppings you wanted on it.
Sure.
Do you want just butter, or do you want the full, they had a name for it, but essentially the loaded potato.
Yep.
And came out hot, steaming, and I thought it was good. But you got to realize that there are so many booths here. And you've got the fish and chips.
Yeah.
Again, authentic to the Renaissance era.
Yeah.
Hamburgers,
Yep.
pizzas, Chinese food, beignets.
I'm kind of like thinking I might want to do a beignet. I might want to do a crepe, something kind of sweet and pretty.
It looks like all the drinks are in bottles.
We brought our own water though.
We did. Here's some women. Everyone's got their own turkey leg. They look like they're enjoying it. There's folks from the LA County Fire Department passing us. I also saw police earlier.
Yeah.
And I also found out that there is someone from the health department here every day.
Really?
They go around, they check temperatures and make sure there's hand washing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I did because sometimes we've gone to those places where the lavatories, they just have the hand sanitizer. And I liked that they actually have like real water, real soap for washing your hands.
Yeah, this is what, a 2-week event on the weekends here, an annual event, and they have to make sure they're really kind of prepared for the bathrooms, the hand washing, the food operations, and they all have to be up to county health code in LA County.
Yeah.
But I think that, there's a lot of people have different expectations. Some people are dressed to impress with their costumes and their makeup, and I like the people that are dressed. Like, did you see the guy dressed up as one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
No, I did not. That's hilarious. You got a picture with somebody dressed as a rat?
Right. We saw someone dressed as a Christmas tree.
Yes, yes.
So people dress up in many different ways. I like seeing the little kids feeling like, this is normal. People dress up. But I think the one thing that people don't want to have here is an experience where, they leave
and then 2 days later, they're sick as a dog.
regretting it.
Yes.
We recently saw a TV show where it wasn't 2 days later. It was
No, it was like an
immediate.
hour later. It was immediate. It was kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, that's great for the confines of a Hollywood TV show, but the reality is you got so many people that are going to come from different counties, maybe even from out of state, to this Renaissance fair, and they're going to eat and they're going to go back home. And I worry about the people who go, "Oh, I got sick. It must be something I ate."
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily. Well, it's not always something you ate.
Yeah.
It's hard when you have so many people so close that are eating food in these kind of temporary establishments. But when they're up to code and they collaborate with the health department, it can be a really good experience.
Yeah.
And I'm happy that our potato came out steaming.
Yeah, the potato, it was fantastic. And so that is the Renaissance Report.
All right, signing off from the Renaissance Fair. Back to you in the studio.
And that was the Ren Fair Report.
The Ren Fair Report?
The Ren Fair Report. So we have returned to home base.
Yes.
Just returning from the Western Food Safety Conference in Salinas, California. And that was quite a trip.
Yeah, it was a really great trip. And we did try to make this 100% on the road. We actually recorded the second half of this episode while we were driving back from Salinas. And we were brilliant, but I had a major mic malfunction.
Major mic malfunction. Salute.
Nobody's going to get that, babe.
Oh, well. It made me laugh.
So, second half of Western Food Safety Conference on the road. Last week was a 2-day conference. You attended the first day and you spoke on the second day. So, talk about attending a conference like this.
Well, first off, it was the first time attending this, and this was at a college. And when you pull up to it, clearly this was an auditorium, pavilion kind of a location.
It was huge, too.
It was huge, but it's also, did you notice what the major focus was on the sports arena next door?
Or horse rodeo.
Rodeo.
Yes, rodeo.
Yeah. I didn't know what to expect, and I was really blown away by the range of stakeholders. I mean, you had local farm owners, local farms, local businesses. You had local providers, service providers, and equipment companies. You had state level resources being there, whether it was state agencies or NGOs. You had federal agencies. I mean, there were people from the FDA that were there at this event. But even more surprising was how many people were there from Canada. And it really helps you remember that, California, in terms of its produce belt, California is not the only stakeholder here. We're talking about a global impact that this region has with its farming.
Yeah.
And some of the conversations were predictable, but significant in terms of how it pertained to the produce industry.
Yeah. It was really interesting to see how diverse it was in respect to the types of jobs, because you had, people who ran composting companies, farmers there, as you said, all the governmental agency people from Canada, but there was also like a packaging company there.
There were two packaging companies there.
Yeah,
Isn't that crazy?
I thought that was also really interesting to see that it attracted such a wide variety of attendees.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about some of the things that are probably on the top of their minds is, water testing, water treatment, soil quality, and the packaging that they're using to get that. Because that is where, we've seen it. We've been on the farms where it's picked and it's packaged right there immediately.
There.
There's no middle step.
Yeah.
And, you look at the idea of how directly impactful this is on the farm.
Yeah. Actually, I have to say my favorite part, and it was kind of my favorite part when we came up to Salinas the last time, and maybe it's just because of how passionate they are, but we had that whole conversation with the composting guy.
Composting?
Yeah. And first of all, I seem to find large scale composting so interesting. Like, I was so fascinated by everything that he was saying about large scale composting. It was really kind of cool.
Maybe in a parallel universe, you're Gennette the composter or something. Yeah.
We tried composting once when we had our bigger property in Avon, and it was just a major fail.
Yeah, I don't know who to blame there, but it's not an easy job.
No.
And when you're talking about it at scale, and the idea of how can we make sure we're maximizing the value add. This isn't just getting the job done. This is getting it done such that you're adding value. When you're talking about, the soil and the raw ingredients and even the aquifers, you're looking at scenarios where everything is so interconnected that it's kind of like the weakest link in a chain.
Yeah.
If composting is problematic, then does the whole system unravel?
Right.
I don't know.
Well, and also, he made such an interesting point about how he's constantly advising farmers to create their own composting section of their farm, just simply to add to the biodiversity of the soil, because especially if the soil is going to be grow one product over and over and over again, the nutrients get stripped from there. And so having your own composting area where you are adding to the adding, good bacteria, whatever it is, to that soil for regrowing the next generation of the product, so that it doesn't strip it completely dry of any nutrients. I thought that was really interesting.
Well, especially when you kind of recognize the contrast between composting, which seems like an almost, archaic, it's been around forever.
Yeah.
Our ancestors, they were doing some form of that back in the day. And at the same event, you've got like predictive analytics and machinery and robotics and things like that. And it's like, okay, technology is great, but sometimes there's nothing wrong with the way it's been done with certain farming practices.
Going back to the basics.
Back to basics.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that was a little bit of a debrief of what it's like to attend those kinds of conferences. But I want to spend a little time talking about what it is to speak in front of one of these conferences. Because first of all, personally, as an attendee, I love seeing you speak. I think you're a total badass on the stage, and you can really engage the audience in such a unique way. But what is the experience for you from the other side of standing on the stage, looking out to what was a pretty huge audience listening to what you had to say, keeping them all captive?
There are multiple different stories to be told, whether it's a policy update or a tech briefing or, different stakeholders have different purposes. And with those different purposes come different ways of storytelling. You'll have the person who is going to read off of a script. You have a person who's going to read off of a PowerPoint. You've got a panel. You've got these different types of presentations. And I always find it interesting when there's these really big international conferences and they'll bring in someone who's like that motivational speaker. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, why can't there be a motivational speaker kind of an experience, but within the industry?
Yeah, because they are always from outside of the industry.
Right. So what does it mean when it's like, we need to get our audience really riled up, so let's get someone from the outside?
Yes.
I try to be that person from the inside. And, when I have the opportunity to essentially go, okay, I'm going to do something different. And this was one of those examples. No PowerPoint, no notes, no outline, just me and a headset microphone and standing on stage.
Yeah.
And there was a carpeted area where I can go from here to there and kind of stay in this area because of lighting and the camera and stuff like that. And you got to get in the mindset. I kind of start freaking out a little bit. Like, am I going to remember what I'm going to say? And then I have to remind myself that they don't know what I forgot to say. They think that I said everything I want to say.
That is also true.
Was that thing on Friends? They don't know that we don't know that they don't know that we don't know, kind of thing. I have to remind myself.
They don't know we know they know we know.
Yeah, exactly. So having a good story, and then there's telling it like a good story, right? Having elements of storytelling that are going to be engaging. There are so many videos out there, especially for those who are doing TED Talks and keynote speeches. The worst thing you want to do is introduce yourself after you've been introduced. Mm-hmm. You don't want to lose them. So I love starting off with something that's going to throw people.
Right. Something that gives them, that's unusual, that they haven't necessarily heard before, or maybe they've heard forever, but not in that context.
Right, because when you hear, hi, thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so-and-so, and let me tell you my background.
Yep.
That's when people are checking their emails.
Yeah.
That's when they're, checking their social media platforms and stuff like that. I want to, first word out of my mouth is followed by people looking up.
Yeah.
And putting away their distractions, kind of a thing. And so, this time was the first time that I started it with Once Upon a Time.
Yeah. And it was great. And you could definitely tell that you grabbed the audience with those first 4 words.
And I told them something that no one, maybe except for you, would predict that I would tell as if my first story,
Yeah.
talking about leadership lessons I learned on a submarine.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that kind of sparks this, okay, what is he talking about?
Right.
I'm sure he's going to take us to where we need to be, kind of a thing.
You know, the thing is, too, that I think was interesting about the way that you started it, because it was such a different energy than how so many other people had been speaking the day before. And you were the first, like, actual speaker. There were people who had a couple of things that they needed to, like, administrative and welcome and all of that stuff. But you were the first person. But, you know, they'd been seeing people speak all day the day before. But I think what it did by starting it differently and also grabbing them in such a way that they were so engaged that it kind of became a call and response kind of thing, where you were talking and there were a couple of times when people, you know, one of them kind of mumbled it out loud, didn't think you could hear, but
that was hilarious. Well, there was the guy like center right in front of me, who I was telling the story, kind of explaining, making the connection now, talking about the food industry, and he yelled out, "All hands on deck," which is accurate, but it's also kind of, I mean, I'm wondering if this guy was in the Navy.
Right.
Because that's a very Navy kind of a way of explaining it. So clearly he was listening and making the connections, and I was able to acknowledge that. But later, way over to my right, when I was trying to explain the scenario that was just happening with Raw Farm.
Yeah.
And guy blurted out, recall under protest.
Yeah.
Which not only validates that the audience is there with me.
Yes.
But imagine, how difficult it could be to, without requesting, invite the audience to be part of this conversation. And the storytelling is not necessarily a one-way transaction.
Yes.
Or exchange.
And also being able to adapt to it as well. There are some speakers who are so by the script that people calling out to them on something, it would throw them, but it seems to feed you.
Yeah, because, one of my observations is that, and I get it, you can't be in two places at the same time, and there's a lot of work and there's a lot of places to go, but too often you have a speaker who shows up, speaks, and leaves.
Yeah.
And whenever possible, I try to be that speaker who's there for the entire event, because even though I didn't speak on day one, listening to the panel talk about predictive modeling and how important the models are in telling the story that the data alone can't tell.
Right.
And listening to Amy Philpott talk about the difference between a mock recall and a recall simulation, and how a recall simulation is all hands on deck.
Yes.
And that becomes an experience, a shared experience. And no one tells the story about a mock recall, but they'll tell the experience. They'll tell the story about that recall simulation.
Right.
And so to be able to have that kind of call back, it's almost like I'm validating them and validating myself.
But here's the other piece that I've always thought why it was so valuable for you to come at the beginning of a conference, stick around, meet people, talk to people. It updates your understanding of different parts of the industry. Because especially with this audience, it was such a new audience. It was such a different audience than any of the audiences. You're usually in front of just strictly food safety professionals who show up to the same conferences over and over. But you go to this one and you're hearing perspectives that might be different, or learning brand new information from an area that doesn't normally get to speak on a stage like, Food Safety Summit or International Association for Food Protection. They're not normally on the bill for it, so you would not hear their knowledge. But here, when you show up and you actually attend it, you're updating your understanding of the industry because of that.
Well, I wish there was more storytelling. I think there's a lot of stories to tell, and there's some great storytellers out there. I wish there was more storytelling on these bigger stages. But I would give some advice really quickly to those leaders / storytellers. My thesis, if you will, was that I wanted to be impactful, not just in terms of science, technology, law, and policy, but in terms of leadership. And my thesis was that storytelling is an important part of leadership.
Yeah.
But there's a saying about how you can't lead if you never get out from behind your desk. I'll tell you this. You can't read the room if you're not hanging out in the room for a while.
Right.
So there's a need for that balance there. To tell a story in an audience, you need to truly understand that audience and not make assumptions and be able to connect and do that.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Well, let's just kind of wrap it up and what are your final thoughts on the conference as a whole?
I'm glad I stuck around. There were a lot of good conversations. I thought it was interesting, the feedback, not only on what I was saying, but the fact that I was talking without notes. And I thought the feedback was interesting, not in terms of just, you stood there and you didn't even have notes or PowerPoint or whatever, because I think that, again, that is something that we don't often see. But the sheer appreciation for storytelling that I felt from, and I heard from audience members, and I think they got it, storytelling is an important part in a community and in a culture. And, I think my thesis really, my key points really fell on receptive ears. Storytelling is not just telling the story, but it's also listening to stories and cultivating the next generation, if you will, of storytellers. You have to have all three in order for it to have a sustainability within said culture. Kind of like we're talking about composting. Storytelling goes back to the beginning of, mankind.
Right.
Right? So composting, storytelling, you know what? Just because it's been around forever doesn't mean that there's no place for it today.
Yeah. What are your final thoughts where just this whole on the road experience is concerned?
Sure. Well, I think, well, pardon the pun, it almost seemed like a more organic conversation.
Right. Fits into the whole theme.
It does. But I think that there's something about driving down the 101 and you've got the agricultural fields on both sides of you. It's literally not just on your mind, but it's in your peripheral.
That is very true. I didn't actually think of that, but that is really true. As we were talking on the way back and kind of debriefing, we were really getting to enjoy the land that was growing, the food that people were talking about at this whole conference. And it was beautiful.
Well, and engage our senses, because not only are we seeing this, but there were places. Remember when we drove through the artichoke capital of the world, and you can smell it.
Yep.
And we saw the artichokes. We even took a little social media video of the artichoke. I mean, they just went on forever, and that smell. And by the way, we did buy some artichokes. And we brought them home and ate them the next night.
Yeah.
And my God, they were so good.
Oh.
But it's an organic, a lived experience, and you're engaging your senses as you're talking about this. It seems to add to the experience.
Yeah. Well, I say we try this again next week when we travel to Chicago and to Michigan. And at the very least, it'll push me to improve my editing skills.
Well, I think there's some places we go. It's great to be closer to our food. And I think that's one thing we need. We need to be closer to our food. I mean, so many times I'll go to the grocery store and the person at the checkout counter will say things like, what is that? Where'd that come from?
Right.
And I'm like, you work at a store. How do you not know this? But I think, we need to be asking ourselves, where did this come from? Because it may be closer than we think.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much for listening to Confessions of a Food Safety A-Hole on the Road. We hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, thank you so much to all of our new and returning listeners. As the great Ted Lasso says, we appreciate you.
Now, if you have any questions or wish to give us feedback directly, please email us at pepnexusinfo@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Confessions of a Food Safety A-Hole is sponsored by Eagle Protect, the only glove company that third-party tests its gloves because trust us isn't a food safety strategy. Learn more at www.eagleprotect.com and safeguard what matters. Anything you wish to say, Darin?
Yes, I'd like to take this opportunity to test pilot what I think may be the ultimate soundtrack for the Food Safety A-Hole. I found inspiration from the Ren Fair.
Okay.
So without further ado, warm up the hurdy-gurdy!